Good evening, everyone. My name is Hemant Singh. I work at a think tank called Delhi Policy Group, but essentially, I've been a practitioner of what we are going to be discussing for the last 50 years. And I want to begin by just mentioning to you that I was in Japan the previous week, the entire week, for their leading think tank forum. And it's like our ICENA. And the subject of discussion there was exactly what we are discussing here. Their overarching theme was resilient global order. And the theme at which I spoke was reimagining, redoing multilateralism in a manner which is more contemporary. And I must mention to you just in brief that the reimagining multilateralism more or less could boil down to doubling down on the resilience of the Western-led order and maintaining its hegemonic power, and not on any accommodation of the global south or of the emerging countries. There's heavy preoccupation about maintaining the Western, let us say, Western alliance-led power over entire Eurasia on the east as well as on the west, and over world order. However, Mr. Trump has thrown a spanner in the works, of course, as you know. So let me give you 4 or 5 opening points about the nature of world order, because that I think is important for the panelists and also important for you in the audience. The first thing is, we all know that multilateralism is a core principle of India's foreign policy, even though we also know that multilateralism and the UN system has not always served India's interests very well. There are many examples of that, but I think Sanjay or somebody else would comment on that. The second thing to note is that multilateralism is not a natural condition of global geopolitics. It happens and it requires the sustained commitment of major powers to global institutions and normative order. Without that, there is no multilateralism. What is the mainstay of global order? It is the nation state. And the nation states really act primarily in their own interests, even though from time to time they engage in common activities for the global good. But it's always within that perspective of national interest first. What is also completely a permanent feature of global order is rivalry among great powers and their quest for dominance. That's permanent, and it is a competitive world order. It will remain like that. And of course, people thought in the 1990s that history is long gone, but it's back with a vengeance, and we're back in a very intensely competitive world order. Since we're talking multilateralism, I would like to say that yes, it's true that overarching global issues do require global solutions, but I would also like to caveat that by saying these need to be pursued in a manner which is compatible with the need of nation states to protect their own sovereign interests. So there's no such thing as multilateralism for multilateralism's sake. And this happens within a framework where basically your national interests come first, and that has to be kept in mind. The only way multilateralism can gain legitimacy is from universally applicable UN Charter-based, international law-based order, protecting equal rights of all nations, big and small. So that is not quite happening, and I'll mention 4 or 5 things why it is not happening and how it's not happening before I open up to the panelists to speak. So the way the world is configured today, since resilience is the leitmotif of our entire 1.5-day exercise, is not conducive to resilience, because the status quo is not certainly conducive to long-term resilience of world order. We know that multilateralism is in crisis. It needs root and branch reform. It needs to correspond to contemporary realities. But we also know that if you look at the way it is configured today, then the reform system cannot be based on the existing power structures or on efforts to continue their permanent dominance. So it has to incorporate more equitable and cooperative relations among nations. It has to make room and accommodate the global south as decision makers and stakeholders in the system. And I say that because nobody needs the global order more than the developing countries and the global south, because they are the ones who are subjected to arbitrarily imposed demands, and they need that order more than any of the great powers or the major powers of the day. I have many other questions here, but to the panelists I'll say, look, you are going to be addressing many of these issues. One element which is clear is that today's reality is that we have predominance of statecraft based on coercive power and unilateral actions. So that's one permanent feature today. The second one is there is a tendency, especially from those who advocate rules-based order, to talk about upholding rules-based order, while not hesitating in the slightest bit to break the rules in practice whenever expedient, and undermining multilateral institutions at the same time. So this is happening concurrently. And the third element here is that economic coercion and unilateral measures as an integral component of geopolitical strategy is being extensively practiced. Now, we saw that under the Biden administration with the sweeping sanctions against Russia, which have basically caused a tremendous amount of economic damage in the global south. But now we have this trend towards using tariffs under Mr. Trump. So we will see how that goes. I would just like to mention to the panelists that failure to uphold critical elements of the United Nations Charter and international rules-based order can lead to eventually abandoning them entirely, and that will definitely result in a much more dangerous world that we already live in. And so I would say that the challenge today is to restore some semblance of universal adherence to the purposes and principles of the UN Charter. There can be no exceptions. There can be no veto powers on this. And the UN system must undergo root and branch reform. While we wait for this, clearly the guardians of the current order are not making it easy to make any root and branch changes. So the global south, the India, emerging powers, etc., will really have to step up their own act to try and see and secure a greater stakeholding in decision making for the globe. So I'll stop there, and I think minilaterals may be the way to go. That's another aspect which is emerging, because if the multilateral system, which is already ground to a standstill, if it slides even further, then what can be left with apart from bilateral agreements and interactions will be some kind of minilateral frameworks. So with that, I invite now Shivali Lavale, Director of the Symbiosis School of International Studies, Pune, to make your opening remarks.
Thank you, sir. At the outset, a big shout out to ORF for putting this wonderful forum together once again, and for inviting me. Very happy to be here. I think a lot has been said over the last 1.5 days. There have been a lot of overlaps, and please forgive me if I sound repetitive. And of course, it's the last session. So let me start by, I have 6 minutes, sir. So I'm going to start by just very quickly, just taking you a little back in time. I believe, but before that, reimagining multilateralism, I would have actually put a colon and questioned it, by saying, adding a line that have become a full circle question mark. Because it does seem so, and let me answer that question once I'm through with my presentation. So to begin, actually, these are World War II institutions, the Bretton Woods institutions, the UN, and I believe that they seem to have run their course. The post-World War II era, a very, very West-dominated discourse. We have the reconstruction of Europe through the Marshall Plan, and the aid that's been extended to a completely decimated Europe and by the United States. We also see the emergence of a bipolar world, which is very neatly divided into two camps. That's the Soviet bloc and the liberal world order. But with that, you also have a spate of the independence movements and a wave of decolonization that sweeps across Asia, as well as the African states and Southeast Asia. In the 60s, then, you have Oglesby coming out with the North-South binary. And obviously, the grammar of multilateralism sort of starts developing. And then in the 80s, you have the Brandt Report, which actually sort of institutionalizes this North-South binary. But let me remind you, ladies and gentlemen, that actually this global South that we are talking about and that we're discussing is actually a Western offering and needs to be challenged today. Taking forward this North-South binary, you also then have the North-South-South, the triangular cooperation, as well as the South-South cooperation when we talk about development aid and so on and so forth. At the turn of the century, you have the rise of China, the 70s. You also have, closer to our times, a very assertive foreign policy positioning under Vladimir Putin. And of course, you have other states like India, but also Turkey and more recently, Iran. Here, let me introduce another aspect which I think we have been talking about in the last few sessions, that is the nation state versus the civilization state. And while, of course, the contours of the civilization state haven't been fleshed out to the fullest, civilization and civilizational states, we need to make that distinction. I think today we are seeing the coming together of the non-Western world, which is actually a response to what has happened in the last, I would say, 7.5 or 8 decades. Early 2000s, we have the financial crisis, the Arab Spring, 2011, 2014, the refugee crisis, and 2020, COVID. And I will just stop at that. Of course, there have been a lot of crises, far and few in between. But all of these go to show that there haven't really been adequate responses from multilateral institutions. And that has, in fact, caused the utter chaos that we find ourselves in. In the 2000s, we then have the emergence of minilaterals or plurilaterals as a response to the sort of degeneration of the multilateralism. The BRICS in 2009, you have the Quad in 2007, the SCO in 2001, and then, of course, 2010s, 2020s, you have a flurry of a lot of activity in that space. Plurilateralism is the go-to as a response to multilateralism, which really hasn't delivered the fruits to many a country. You do have a lot of minilaterals in, and let me then come to a more specific region, but before that, I would also like to challenge what is the Global South. Because this is really a Western offering, and while we have been talking about India as the voice of the global south, I think it's also high time we started sort of revisiting these terms and, actually changing the grammar of multilateralism, if that is a possibility. So what can India do? I believe that India can strengthen its regional role before actually, of course it is a global player, but I think it has a lot of potential to really stake its claim in the regional order. And particularly, a case in point would be the Indo-Pacific, and more specifically, the Indian Ocean region. We already have, the mini-laterals, but also multilateral institutions. The IORA is one of them, the IONS is another. But that said, isn't it time that we also reformed those institutions? There is more recently the IMEC, the I2U2, and the India-France-UAE trilateral. All of these go to show that when there aren't answers that are forthcoming from a multilateral system, countries then often regroup themselves, and particularly countries, the middle powers, that find in each other very, very relevant partners to take certain agendas forward. And finally, so if I could just take a few seconds, just to answer that question that I have put forth right at the outset, that have become a full circle, I do believe that we have. We're looking at a sort of scenario that, before World War I broke out, we're looking at the rise of ethno-nationalism. We're looking at alliances between different powers, but of course that was a very Europe-centric system then. We're really looking at all of that all over again. And finally, economic competition. So yes, ladies and gentlemen, I do believe we've come a full circle. Very happy to discuss this further. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. Sanjay, you take 5 minutes, please. I think you are going to talk about multilateral reform. Go ahead.
Thank you, Ambassador. I concur with some of the comments that you made in your introductory remarks. The world order that we have today is constituted of sovereign states that are operating in the realm of anarchy. Anarchy is defined generally in international politics as absence of supranational government above nation states. Since nation states are operating in the realm of anarchy, they indulge in self-help strategies. So what are these self-help strategies? You build domestic capabilities to respond to external threats. The second component of self-help is you cooperate through multilateral frameworks to protect and promote your national interests. So multilateralism is therefore not a goody-goody thing. Multilateralism is at its core transactionalism. There is efficient transactionalism and then there is inefficient transactionalism. If multilateralism does not promote national interest of large number of countries, then it is bound to fail. There is a criticism that, especially among the developing countries, that the current United Nations framework is not sufficiently efficient. Why? Because it is not representing or protecting their interests as much as it should. And it seems to be leaning more towards the interests of the Western countries. So therefore, there is a disappointment. If you notice the arguments of Donald Trump, he is also saying the same thing. But let me explain what it is, what are the differences. Donald Trump is also saying we are pumping in more resources and these international institutions are not giving us the returns that we want. But this apparent similarity is superficial because there is a fundamental difference in the way developing countries approach multilateral frameworks such as United Nations and others. Why? Because despite their disappointment with the functioning of the multilateral governments, organizations, the developing countries prefer to work through multilateral organizations because it is much better to engage bigger powers through collaboration with other smaller powers. So therefore, despite many disappointments, you see that kind of arguments being made. For instance, if you see Singapore, I mean, it's not a developing country, but Singapore Foreign Minister Vivian Balakrishnan's statement last year, he is talking about why multilateral trade order is important for countries such as Singapore. Whenever we talk about reforming the United Nations framework, one of the things that we often hear from the Western countries is that, look, we need to improve the efficiency of the UN system and cut down the wastage. For many developing countries and emerging economies like India, such arguments are seen as a diversionary tactic from doing real reform of the United Nations Security Council. Well, if the Western countries or the developed countries are so keen on reducing the wastage, they can outsource a lot of the work of the United Nations to countries such as India. After all, we have pioneered the art of business process outsourcing. We can do a lot of the back-end work for these organizations and reduce the wastage if they wish to do so. So efficiency cannot be the only criteria under which you can, or reducing wastage cannot be the only component of reforming the UN Security Council. I mean, you cannot stop the overall reform process. The other thing that we need to keep in mind is often when India articulates the need to reform UN Security Council, India is saying the structural change in the UN Security Council will reduce inefficiencies and improve the overall efficiency. The Indian government has articulated that the new orientation to reformed multilateralism, to reform the UN Security Council and other aspects of the United Nations. So what should be the principles of this reformed multilateralism that India is talking about? In my opinion, there are three components to that. One should be the principle of inclusion. When we say principle of inclusion, that doesn't mean democracy or equal vote to all members within the United Nations. You cannot have UNGA electing UN Security Council every 5 years. That's not how it is going to work. Inclusion implies incorporating countries that have capabilities, that have demonstrated capabilities to deal with power relations. India has demonstrated it, for instance. The COVID vaccine Maitri that we did, the multilateral peacekeeping operations that we do, and massive HIDR exercises that we carry out across the world. That is an indication of capabilities. So, one, principle of inclusion does not mean democracy or equal vote. Two, reform should be based on capabilities. Three, United Nations requires countries with what is called as bridging social capital. The word with bridging was used yesterday, today in some of the sessions. Countries such as India are often called sitting on the fence. I disagree with that kind of framing. What we have is a bridging social capital. We engage with both sides. So what United Nations requires is countries such as India that can engage both sides and bridge the differences. So these are the three principles on the basis of which I think we should move forward in reforming the UN Security Council. The big question can be asked, will the reform of UN Security Council ever happen? I don't know whether it will happen because it's difficult to predict. But in 1980s, or if somebody asked, will the USSR, will it collapse? Nobody anticipated. In global politics, there will be windows of opportunity and we should be ready to seize that window of opportunity. So that is something that we need to keep in mind. The United States continues to be preeminent power. We need to engage with the United States because it is the only power that can also define the contours of UN Security Council, along with others, of course, the permanent 5 members. It is going to be very painful engaging with the United States in the near future, but nonetheless we have to do that. And United States should also recognize the moment it is moving away from multilateral frameworks, it is opening up spaces for its competitors. United States today is not a member of any multilateral framework, economic architectures in the larger Indo-Pacific region. Yes, it is part of APEC, but if you see RCEP and other things, it is not there. That's okay, but point is we are seeing rise of minilaterals as my earlier speaker pointed out, which is very important. Will reform happen? The recent Pact for Future summit that happened is a positive step in that direction, but we need to wait and see, but we should be ready for the window of opportunity. To conclude, quite often there is a tendency of trying to replicate the principles that are there in domestic politics onto international politics, such as equality, equal representation. That is not how you are going to manage power politics. Power politics will be managed by indulging in power politics. I'm a hard realist on that. So when we expand, or whenever the discussion of UN Security Council happens, it should be about dealing with power politics efficiently. Values and principles should be instruments. They are not an end in itself. Values and principles are instruments to manage power politics. They are not an end in themselves. That's where I would rest my argument. Thank you.
Thank you, Sanjay. Pretty original in terms of your concept. Now, our next speaker is Gaurav Saini from the Council for Strategic and CSDR, New Delhi. Gaurav?
Thank you so much, Ambassador, and thank you to ORF for inviting me to this very important forum. I have very little to add because this is a very sort of illustrious panel in that my co-panelists are quite experts in their fields. So instead, what I'm trying to do is perhaps take 2 steps back and ask some fundamental questions. So if you're disappointed that I'm not giving any answers, I have very little to offer in that sense. But I think it was in 2023, while presenting the annual report, that the UN Secretary General said that the UN has a choice between either to reform or to rupture. And when we talk about the failure of multilateralism, most of our interest or our attention goes to UN-led multilateralism or UN-led mechanism, obviously because most of the research is done on that. But multilateralism is much bigger than that. We saw India's focus also on this idea of reformed multilateralism through its G20 presidency. There was a special task force, brilliant reports, by the way, multiple reports on this concept. But I feel that the real challenge for us today is to identify what exactly is failing in this system. And during my research, I landed upon this fantastic document called the Multilateralism Index 2024, which is jointly put out by the International Peace Institute and the Institute for Economics and Peace. And some of their overall trends that they realized or they found out for 2024 were that participation in the multilateral system has generally remained stable or increased across all domains except trade. This indicates states remain engaged even if the engagement is shifting from cooperation towards contestation. Second thing they realized was that there is deteriorating performance, which means performance has declined across all domains. And what they mean by performance is the largest declines were seen in, for example, peace and security, human rights and climate action. The third thing they found out was that inclusivity has increased across all domains, particularly regarding the engagement of civil society NGOs and representation of women in mostly UN-led multilateral efforts and organizations. Beyond the UN-led system, if you look at it, if you look at the whole idea of multilateralism, you find that there are multiple groups, what we are also referring to mini-laterals, but essentially they are also an act of engagement. So the crisis of multilateralism is not that the system, the crisis of multilateralism is that of a system that has ongoing engagement, but diminished effectiveness. So you could perhaps compare this to how many followers you have on Facebook and how many real friends you have in your life. So it's something like that, right? So while making multilateralism diverse vertically within the UN system or trying to reform the UN system, and also horizontally, which is outside of the system, it is essential, therefore, to understand what is the challenge to its effectiveness. And I would like to offer 3 ideas of what the challenges are. I think the dysfunction of multilateralism could be understood through the fact that multilateralism is today congested, contaminated, and contested. And it is important to focus on the third element, which is contestation. Because I think most of our focus is on looking at multilateralism from India's perspective, looking at multilateralism from the global south perspective, etc., etc. But multilateralism takes 2 to tango. We cannot just focus on how we see multilateralism. We have to also at the same time look at how the other, let's say the North, sees multilateralism. And based on that view, I think we've noticed that multilateralism today is congested. There are too many multilateral forums. This was a criticism, used to be the criticism of the UN system. Too many committees, too many groups doing the same thing, overlapping interests, etc. But we are seeing the same thing outside of the UN system, right? Then you have contamination. You have both inside and outside of the system, politicization of aid, you have selective application of international law, you have weaponization of institutions, Again, more important from India's perspective is the weaponization of institutions that are outside of the UN system. And finally, contested. And we are a part of this. We are part of the contestation that we've been discussing. So you see a rise of alternative forums, challenge to Western dominance, and demands for reform. Right? The idea of contesting the system is actually leading up to its congestion and its contamination. It is giving, it is politicizing the concept of multilateralism. So you see the certain kind of multilateralism from China or from Russia or non-Western countries. Right? And I think my time is almost over, but my final point, and again a question that I want to leave us with is, we often discuss this, and I think it was mentioned of India being the bridge between the East and the West and the North and the South. But I think we have to realize that the inescapable curse of being a bridge is that while people get connected because of you, you get fixed in a geography and a space. So I think that's an important question to ask in terms of what do we lose by being a bridge. So I'll stop there.
Thank you, Gaurav. Now we have the last speaker, Sampa Kundu, consultant from RIS. You have the floor.
Thank you, sir. And thank you, ORF, for inviting me. So basically, as my previous speaker already mentioned, that we have very little to add, and I think I'm the last speaker, so I really don't know how much I can contribute. But I would like to focus on two things. One is decolonization of multilateralism and localization. And I think these two things are very important as far as India's role in this new era of multilateralism is concerned, or in other words, how to reimagine multilateralism from an Indian perspective. So the first thing is decolonization of multilateralism. I will not be going into the theoretical details, but there are few key aspects that I think are very important when we are talking about decolonization. The first thing we all know, and that is the decolonization of design and structures. So in many words, the previous speakers, they have already mentioned about the relocation of relocating the headquarters, restructuring, etc. Then we also have decolonization of finance, where we are talking about how to redistribute the financial capabilities and the financial resources, resource allocation, in one word. And then third thing is decolonization of knowledge. I think that is very important. So we are working on indigenous knowledge system, starting from Kautilya to traditional medicine, etc. So these are few fields. These are some of the key aspects where we actually can talk about how to reimagine multilateralism. And here we can actually go beyond the UN system. Then the fourth important thing is decolonization of the theory of change. Here, we can talk about the bottom-up approach instead of always talking about top-down approach. So these are few key aspects that I thought are very important when we talk about decolonization of multilateralism. Then let me come to how India can contribute in this entire process. So Global South, we are hearing about it, we are talking about it. Prime Minister Modi, we have now established Dakshin, which is working on all these aspects, like how to reimagine multilateralism, how India can be the leader of Global South. So I think that is a very positive development that we are now witnessing, and we should actually pursue it. And then we also have the strategic partnership. So in the last session, the speakers were talking about Quad and other strategic alliance and strategic partnership. I think that is also another, window for us where we can talk about reimagining multilateralism. So, these are minilaterals. But then, as we all know that when we have small points to add, then only we can have the bigger picture to visualize. Then technological collaboration, where we can actually talk about India's collaboration, India's partnership with other multilateral organizations. International Solar Alliance is one of the example where India is actually trying to contribute positively. Then climate leadership, proactive diplomacy, regional leadership. Regional leadership, I would like to talk a bit because India is now re-emerging as a regional leader, not in South Asia, but in the entire, gamut of Indo-Pacific, Southeast Asia. And when we talk to the Southeast Asian leaders, their experts, their subject experts, we get a clear view, clear perspective that what exactly they want from India. And I think we need to seriously consider their views. If India wants to be the regional leader, not only in South Asia, but also beyond the South Asian region. Economic integration, our previous speakers, they have already spoken about it. And again, India's partnership with forums like G20 and then other forums like BRICS, etc. And then there is a small criticism also, which I would like to highlight here. And this criticism actually talk about this, this is basically talking about a competition between India and China. So if India wants to emerge as a global leader or a leader of global South, then will India face a rough competition from China? That is the basic question, and I think we need to answer that question. And here, I'd like to throw this question and not answer this. And I would like to hear from all of you that what do you think about this particular aspect? If India wants to emerge or re-emerge as the leader of global South, then where are the competitions that India faces from China? Finally, I will conclude by saying that decolonization and localization are two key aspects where India can actually play a very significant role. And India has a potential to play an important role, re-emerge as the leader of the global South, the voice of global South. And there are few initiatives that Government of India has already taken, and few initiatives will come up. So with that, I will conclude my presentation. Thank you.
Okay, we have, thank you very much, Sampa. We have a lot of ideas which have been thrown up. And I must say that I'm delighted to see that the panelists are taking this very much from a deeply studied perspective, not just the perspective of a practitioner like myself. So congratulations to all of you, the way you have framed your initial remarks. We do have challenges, however, and the challenge is really that the real world in which we are situated is not looking too terribly kindly to accommodate some of the things which we would aspire to, which the global South may aspire to. Now, let me start with some of these institutional elements which I could throw to the panelists because all of you mentioned the G20. Now, G20 nominally is the key instrument of major economies to create the basis of a global prosperity, humming economy across the world, etc. Keeping in mind the diversities, etc., which are represented geographically across the world. Nonetheless, the focus of the West is the G7. There is no G20 in it. The US Secretary of State has just announced that he's not going to go to the G20 in South Africa because they have political differences with South Africa. Japan, our great friend in Asia, the fellow democracy, maritime democracy, is putting all its eggs in the G7 basket. There is no such thing as the G20 anywhere in the picture. Now, that does lead you to a scenario where the importance of other institutions, especially for the global South, is rising. So there's a greater interest in BRICS. There are 23 members in BRICS now, virtually. Actually, we need to restrict the membership. Otherwise, if you open it up, it'll become a G77 in no time. So what do you think, what are the institutions which we need to focus on? Because G20 is a question mark. We have we have BRICS, but BRICS also has a lot of admonishments, etc., already coming out from the Trump administration about what it would do to BRICS if BRICS took some actions which he thought were not in American interest. That's one side of it. So the other side is that whereas the Biden administration has concentrated on the hegemony or reviving the hegemony of the US-led West across the world. Now, Trump is trying to establish a standalone hegemony of the United States, so which also covers, which includes its own allies in a certain way, impact them negatively. So let's see, where do we navigate ourselves? What do we do? And somebody mentioned Singapore about rules-based order and trade. That's about all that they need, they're interested in. Apart from that, Singapore says there is no such thing as a global south. It's a misnomer. And there's no need and there's never going to be any UN reform. So, I mean, there's no danger for Singapore ever making it to the UN Security Council as a permanent member, but still, this is the kind of sentiment which comes from our own friends. So I'd like each of you to comment on some of these aspects and then we'll open it up to the floor. Go ahead. Go ahead, Sanjay, if you wish to.
Thank you for those comments. One on the question of bridge that Gaurav raised. We are not acting as a bridge because that is our objective. It is just that the contemporary geopolitical, geoeconomic conditions are such that we emerged as a bridge. You look at Quad. Does Quad recognize India's territorial integrity like the way we define? How many countries in Quad recognize Jammu, Kashmir, Ladakh as integral part of India like the way we define? No, but we are still part of it. How many BRICS countries recognize India's territorial integrity as we define in Jammu, Kashmir and Ladakh? No, but we are part of it. Now, if these countries ask us to respond to somebody's territorial integrity in Ukraine, we will not have the same position. Yes, we will have positions, but they will differ substantially from both BRICS and also from Quad. So therefore, naturally, because of the way we are treated and our own geopolitical interests and geoeconomic interests, we have emerged as sort of a bridge, and we are not willing to take up these binary dichotomy positions because of our own experiences. So that is the reason why we are progressing on that. On the question of what are the kind of approach, I agree with you in the sense that we need to focus a lot on bilateral component because at the end of this day, as I pointed out in my introductory remarks, world order is constituted by nation states. The multilateral and other things are very fluid. They come and go. So we need to focus on developing robust relationship at a bilateral level. And of course we will follow, as Shivani ji pointed out, on a multilateral framework as well. So there is no either this or, it is about and. You do robust bilateral relationships, you do multilateral relationships, you do multilateral relationships. Look, if and when UN Security Council reform happens, Article 108 says that 2/3 of the UN General Assembly should vote for you, that is 129 countries. So you cannot achieve that voting pattern. Of course, we have done it in various other instances, but with reference to UN Security Council, without minilaterals, without robust relationship with big powers. So this is an integrated approach that we need to take. So that is what I think going forward. In terms of building robust relationship at a bilateral level with major powers, minilaterals to address the specific needs, which together will help us gain some traction if and when the UN Security Council reform happens.
Thank you. Any other panelists wishing to speak? Please go ahead.
I think India should consolidate its position as or rather aim to become an extremely robust regional player. And having said that, I think the minilaterals like, the IMEC, and therein India becomes in fact the linchpin, linking South and West Asia to the Pacific. And India has a very crucial role to play therein. The I2U2, again, India, when it comes to food security, health, water, space, technology, India plays a very, very important role in all of that. And of course, the trilateral that I mentioned, of course, I'm really focusing on the Indian Ocean. And I think, I believe that India, by doing so, by consolidating its position as an extremely important regional role player, could then have an impact on a certain multilateral institutions that you have mentioned, sir.
Just a small comment. I think I completely agree and understand, Sanjay, what you're saying in terms of almost a staggered approach, wherein you need to be everywhere, at all the times. But what I think I would recommend or suggest would be a slightly more nuanced approach, where we are making certain choices. And it's not that we've not done that in the past, and it's not that you get fixed in those choices. So I'm not recommending binaries. For example, if you can see that each of your objectives with the SCO has been frustrated, and that's not because of you, that's because of others, it seems sort of a wastage of resources if you continue to engage and keep your expectations up, when we can see that diplomatically you are trying to start something bilateral with Central Asian states, where you've done the summit twice, once online, once in person, things like that. So I think what I'm trying to push towards is perhaps more reflection, and perhaps getting over this fear that if we are not in the room, then we'll miss something. I think so. Perhaps more conscious policy in terms of where we want to and what we want to achieve with our multilateralism. And to that order, I think the reforms of the UNSC, the G4 formula that we have suggested, Ambassador Ruchira Kamboj, for example, had put it forward. Within that, you have the Coffee Alliance with Pakistan, Spain, Italy. Now, our relationships with Italy and Spain have improved over the past 5 years. So those relationships could be pushed in that direction, along with what you were saying in terms of trying to get those number of votes for the UNSC reforms.
Okay, so I think we can open up to questions from the floor. We've got 15 minutes, and it's about time that I think there are many people who were panelists in previous sessions. So please go ahead. We have a question there.
Good evening to everybody. You are dismissing the multilateral approach, decolonization, unilateral hegemony of the world. Then you have suggested that self-help group, regional leaders. So how far it is possible that India could strengthen its relations with its neighboring countries? Is it any possibilities in future? How far it is possible?
I just want to, we obviously have been discussing Trump in almost all sessions. So can we identify some areas, some multilateral institutions where you think Trump would want to invest his energies to achieve outcomes, obviously for US interest?
Please go ahead.
I am Mohan Kumar. See, if multilateral institutions are dying down, in this case, where the global weak, I am not using the word global south, global weak will go. What would be the emerging world order in that case? Second thing, is decolonization possible? If decolonization takes place, there will be recolonization. The weak and from the weak, some strong will emerge, and they will do the same thing what has been happening now with the multinational, isn't it? Though there will be recolonization along with the decolonization. Will it not happen? It's economic interest after all. Thank you.
One question that I have. Hello? Yeah, yes. So I have one question and one observation. You mentioned, ma'am, that India should act as a more robust player in its immediate neighborhood, as a regional player. But well, given the fact that your entire South Asia is turning into a kind of a cesspool of radicalization and extremism, and also the fact that you have your relationship with most of your neighboring countries in a very bad shape, how do you see that happening? And my observation is that I think when we are envisioning all these bigger roles for India as a regional player, changing multilateral institutions, I think we are expecting and we are imagining too much from India. Perhaps speaking in realistic terms, India is a very marginal player in South Caucasus. During this recent Ukraine crisis, India was under a heavy pressure from the West, also from the Russian side. Besides that, if we are talking that India is in its sweetest spot in this changing world scenario, perhaps we need to look at our internal institutions, look at our defense forces, look at our internal, even to manage such huge international diplomacy.
Okay,
we
thank
need
you.
a much bigger diplomatic cadre.
We got the picture. So, yeah, yes, it's very important to have a comprehensive focus on national power and maintain that as the basis of what we do abroad. You can never go and project things abroad without being strong at home. And I entirely agree with you on that. Sanjay, would you like to comment on any of the questions which have been raised?
One, thanks Gaurav for triggering the conversation. Genuine thanks for that. Yeah, we will move on for that. The question that one we need to think through is sometimes if we are part of a tent, that doesn't mean we are investing significant resources. Look at ASEAN. I'm not comparing ASEAN with Central Asian countries. The fact that we were not in ASEAN in early stages, it has impacted the way our economic relations have developed. So therefore, sometimes it is important to be part of the tent and at the same time be judicious in the way we deploy resources. On the question of Trump and the multilateral frameworks, Trump has given us a message. Within hours of, as our foreign minister pointed out, he organized Quad, the Quad meeting of the foreign ministers. We have to wait and see how that evolves. So the classic definition of multilateralism is when two or more states, more than two states come together, it is a multilateral framework. In that sense, Quad is a multilateral, but it is a small multilateral, mini-lateral, that's what we are saying. So that could be one of the things. On South Asia, this one thing that we keep hearing these days is South Asia is in bad shape and what needs to be done. Look, there is something unique about South Asia. We share borders with every country and none of those countries share border with anyone else. So they will keep having issues with us because we are a dominant country in terms of our economy, size, and there is ethnic correlations across borders. So you take South Asia, you read the recent book, forgot the author's name, Maharaja Rasgotra's autobiography. You will see that in 1950s, 60s, Nepal was burning the effigies of Mahatma Gandhi. Which country did that? So the kind of relations we had Nepal since then was bad. You take Bangladesh, after Sheikh Mujibur Rahman was assassinated, how was Bangladesh relationship with us? They were hosting India insurgent groups. You take Sri Lanka, 80s, insurgency, we sent in IPKF, we paid a price for that. Pakistan, of course, the less we talk about it, the better. So our relationship with South Asia has always been troublesome. It will be so, and yet we need to move on. And there are trade like European Union will not evolve in South Asia because the nature of these economies. Thank you.
Yeah, I'd just like to add that relatively speaking, I don't remember which was the person who asked these questions, but we've drifted away into South Asia. Relatively speaking, South Asia and the Indian Ocean region are doing well, and both economically as well as overall in the perspective of the broader global developments. We have major issues in Europe where they do not know how to settle their own European security architecture issues, and are, after 100 years of bloody wars, are continuing bloody wars. Now, I'd like to pose one question to all the panelists, that Donald Trump is the only leader in the West who's talking about an end to all conflicts across every continent. And nobody has taken that kind of and he's talking about it from the same positioning as PM Modi has long argued. This is not an era of war. Stop bloodshed. Stop unnecessary, dehumanizing conflicts. So is this something which is going to develop into something which might benefit world order if he is successful in any of these areas? Because immediate focus, of course, will be on on Europe and on the Middle East. But beyond that,
I would just like to add to, I think that question came to me. I would just like to add to what Sanjay has already mentioned, that if we're looking at the Western Indian Ocean, there is this great interest from China as well as the United States. We see, particularly with the East African countries, there are massive investments from China. Djibouti, for that matter, another country where you have a lot of, flurry of activity as far as the bases are concerned. So, South Asia, as the person who asked me this question, that should India actually become a regional player and kind of assume that role? I think what I have suggested is that India could play that role by strengthening its position and also taking a very firm stance through these various minilaterals in the Western Indian Ocean region.
okay. Please go ahead. I think the CSDR should have a view on whether Trump will bring peace or more conflict.
If you allow me, Ambassador, before coming to that very important question, I'd just like to address a comment that was made on multilateral institutions dying. I think, as I tried to argue in my initial remarks, it is in fact not dying, it's on the rise. It's becoming more and more ineffective, and it's serving interests of less and less people. But that doesn't mean that the UN assessed contributions haven't gone up over the past 10 years, or even voluntary contributions. And if you follow the trail, you'll realize that these contributions have actually become instruments of influence on various committees, etc. So they're not dying. They are increasing, but they are becoming ineffective. That's the perception. On your very important question of Trump's promise and whether his promises are going to be good for the world, in my very limited understanding, Ambassador, I would suggest that he is offering a Faustian bargain to both Ukraine and to the Palestinians in the Middle East. I call it Faustian because I don't believe that either of these sides, even if there is a temporary peace, are going to give up on very core fundamental ideas because of which they have been laying down their lives for a very long time. It is a difficult question to answer as a social scientist, because here it is that you almost want to believe this, but there is some history to it. For example, what happened during his term and how American foreign policy with Iran panned out. And is the region more stable? Has similarly with North Korea, for example, the conversations he carried out and where they led. Is South Korea, are the voices of nuclearization quieter in South Korea after Trump's first presidency, or they're more sort of audible? So I don't think that his offerings, especially on conflict resolution, are going to be useful. However, for conflict management in the short run, they could be useful.
Okay, good. One more round of questions, please, and then we'll wrap up because we've got just 4 or 5 minutes left. Sorry, Ms. Kundu.
Just to answer the question on decolonization and recolonization, I think that is very unlikely, because today's era is completely different and today's geopolitics is different. So I think that is very unlikely, and also most of the powers today, most of the nation states today, they believe in the principle of being the responsible nation state. If we take the example of India, I think the popular notion is India wants to become the responsible regional leader and not just a leader. So I think there is a huge difference when we are talking about responsibility that comes with power, and on the other hand only power. So recolonization, like coming of recolonization, I think is very unlikely. Thank you.
My question is to Professor Sanjay. Sir, you have had a very wonderful proposition. I mean, reforming UN, and it would be based on capability of nations like ours. But question is, who will set the rules, and what will be the parameters of that capability, and who will decide that? I mean, that is the question. And second one, I have a comment on this, India as a regional player. I think, we should devise some innovative way outs to revive two of the forgotten regional initiatives. One is SARC and another one is BIMSTEC for our own interest. So how it's difficult, but how, I don't know, but we need to revive it for our own interest. That is my comment. Yeah.
I think the ultimate is the UN reforms. But what I can make out with the all panelists' point of view, it seems to be a very, very distant dream. Reason being because the veto which came up in the 45 was only for 10 years. But then after tasting the blood, Russia, China and US never allowed those things to come. And which stand is quite clear even today. So those reforms are just a distant dream. So should we leave the multilateralism and move toward the multilateralism? That is the future?
Okay, I think that was the last question. So let me just make a very brief, quick comment to the question. No, we should not leave the multilateralism plank, because it's a very fundamental plank. It's the only plank which really provides for global order. Otherwise, there is complete anarchy, as Sanjay was pointing out. So that plank does not go. The question is, how do we achieve a situation in the world where the rules of the multilateral order are actually followed by those who actually set them in the first place? And of course, it's a catch-22. It's a difficult situation. But we need to keep pressing on, and what we are doing in terms of championing our own interests and the interests of the global South through G20 and through other mechanisms, I think that's a very valuable contribution which we are making. The other institutions which we need to be looking at very carefully, we should definitely step up our game in BRICS, because we saw how much of a buzz there was in BRICS in the last summit. And yes, there is antipathy towards it in the West, but BRICS is not against anybody. It's our position which has been taken on board. So that's one. And the second is, of course, the Quad in this part of the world, in our part of the world, which is a stabilizing force, is a soft security mechanism for stabilizing the Indo-Pacific. Those of you who've been commenting on the Quad should just keep in mind that the most important relationship in the Quad is that between the United States and India. The Quad exists because the United States wants to bring India into the regional framework of discussing security issues, economic issues, resilience issues, economic and technology issues. So that's a very specific framework which is in our interest to maintain. And of course, there's so many other things which are happening across the world, but we don't live in very easy times. The Indo-Pacific is disappearing very fast because it's basically becoming the Asia-Pacific once more, as far as our partners on the other side of the Indo-Pacific are concerned. But for us, it will remain the Indo-Pacific, because our interests start all the way across West Asia and go towards the Pacific in the east, and they also encompass the entire eastern coastline of Africa. So 30 seconds from each speaker to conclude their remarks. Let's start the other way around. Ms. Kudu.
Thank you. I think for India, one of the important multilateral institutions to look up to will be ASEAN, because we all know that ASEAN is a success story, at least compared to SARC. And also, I think the second important priority will be BIMSTEC, IORA, Indian Ocean region, because as far as India is concerned, that is a region where India can actually flourish, and India has a lot of potential to collaborate and partner with these countries and look beyond South Asia. Thank you.
I'd just like to reiterate what Ambassador you've already said. I think the UNSC reforms remain one of the most fundamental things that India needs to chase. We've already offered a formula, the G4 formula, and which involves expanding 6 permanent members, so 5 plus 6, 11, and then 5 non-permanent members, taking the total 26 members. Now it is a matter of smart diplomacy, how we chase down each of those votes, and more importantly, the ones that have a veto. We've also offered, for example, in the formula that the new permanent members will not actually exercise their veto for a number of years until and unless it comes to that point. So we are being quite accommodative, but I don't see, there are no indications that hope has been given up, and it should not be at any cost. It's one of the most fundamental institutions, even if it appears ineffective.
On the specific question asked to me about defining the agenda of UN reform, it is going to be challenging, but nonetheless, I think we have to take the initiative. We have done that in December 2022 when we held special discussions in the UN Security Council and other places. As he pointed out, we are working through G4 and there is L69, various groups. The question is, while the agenda is huge, the challenges are huge, that shouldn't deter us from trying to modulate the conversations that happen around the UN Security Council reform. Thank you.
Finally, although multilateralism has diminished, the importance of multilateralism has diminished, I don't think it would be wise to throw the baby out with the bathwater. We would just have to obviously keep the multilateral discourse going on. But of course, there is room for other mechanisms, other arrangements. Thank you.
Okay, we've come to the end of this session. I can see time's up in red and right in front of me. And I would like to thank all the panelists for their wonderful presentations. Thank you very much, and thank you to the audience.